Hello, within the next few minutes I'll take you through project management in a nutshell based on the PMBOK guide. Now, there are various editions of the PMBOK guide, but right now it's on the 5th edition. So this is tailored to the 5th edition. That's not to say it won't fit the 6th edition, because I'm going to show you stuff at a very high level. Why have I chosen to discuss project management based on the PMBOK guide? The reason is the noise levels out there on the internet regarding how difficult the PMBOK guide is a little bit alarming, and I just want to demystify it for you, because many people look at the PMBOK guide as a necessary evil or better than Ambien. Some people say the PMBOK guide is so word heavy, esoteric, difficult, angular, oblique, difficult to understand, all the negative words, all the negative connotations. But it's simply a book, a standard of good project management practices. The first time I picked up the PMBOK guide, I felt, what on earth? This is really heavy. What on earth is all this stuff about? I got to chapter 3 and I found it still a little bit difficult to make out what the book was trying to tell me. Now, they've done a lot better on the 5th edition, but some people still feel this book is very difficult. And that's why I'm giving you a high-level overview. I feel that if you can see where you're headed before you even get into the PMBOK guide, when you finally pick it up, it will make a lot more sense to you. So, the PMBOK guide, being a standard, breaks project management down into discrete components. What exactly is project management? So, let's not look at the screen for now. Let's think. What do you think project management is? Project management's ultimate goal should be thought of first. So what is the main goal of project management? Let's think about what the main goal is. It's to manage a project. For what purpose? To go over budget? To be under budget, or to be on target? It really depends, right? But for the most part, project management is to be on target as far as our cost, as far as our schedule, to deliver the right scope, to make the customer happy. So customer satisfaction, quality, fitness for use, however you define quality, and on time, on budget, and within scope. You see? So project management is all about getting stuff done within defined parameters, achieving a goal, achieving an objective, delivering a product, service, or result, which we call a deliverable, within defined parameters. That's key, the defined parameters. So, project management can be broken down into groups of processes, because to get anything done, there's a process for it, isn't there? To manage a project, there are processes that can be carved out. And these processes can be grouped into large chunks. So let's take a look at what these chunks are. The first chunk is initiating processes. These are processes used to initiate a project. These are processes used to create a document that identifies the project, that authorizes the project, that authorizes the project manager to apply resources to projects. So projects need to be documented. There's something we call a project charter that's developed. And this project charter has the project manager's name, some of the stakeholders are mentioned, some of those things called risks, uncertain events that could impact the project are identified at a very high level. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go right? What exactly is this project meant to achieve, and so on. So it could be a one-page document, but that's done during initiating. Also, during initiating, we identify who the stakeholders of the project are. What's a stakeholder? Someone who holds a stake of interest, or a stake of influence, or a stake of power in the project. Someone who the project could affect, or someone who could affect the project. So that's all done in initiating. And then the next process group is called planning. Planning is where we put the big plan together. Plan your work, work your plan. You've probably heard that expression. In order to have a plan to work, we need to develop one. And this is where we put the big plan together for the entire project. A plan for how to manage the schedule. In other words, get yourself a beat to march to. Don't just be all over the place. Don't have your team members in disarray. Have a schedule. Have a budget. And then plan. How are we going to manage the budget? Are we going to meet every week to do that? Are we going to meet every month? How do we know that we are under budget or over budget or on target? What kind of meetings will we have? What kind of spreadsheets will we have? What kind of software tools will we use? All that stuff is done in planning. Planning has various dimensions. We could plan quality, cost, schedule, risk, communications, procurement, stakeholder management, and so on. There are different areas of knowledge we could plan. And I'll show you that as we go along. But that's pretty much what planning is. Planning how to do everything else. How to communicate. How to acquire the team. Planning how to develop the team. Planning how to keep stakeholders engaged. So this is a really big area. The next area is executing. Executing is about taking those plans that you've developed and executing the plan. Work that plan. It's no good having a plan and not working it. So this is where you work the plan. This is where you ensure that the team is getting stuff done at the right time, in the right way, and so on. The next group is the monitoring and controlling process group. This is where you monitor how the work is progressing. If the work is progressing good, all well and good. Keeping an eye on it. If things are going off target and off track, then you need to emphasize the controlling aspect. You need to control the project and bring things back on track. There are many different things you can control. You can control schedule, you can control cost, scope, risks. You can also control procurement, how subcontractors are executing project work. They're either doing a good job or they're not. And if they're not, then you need to control procurement. Or, in other words, the contract that you have with the subcontractor. So monitoring and controlling has various dimensions. The whole idea about managing change requests, or change orders as some of you call it, this is also talked about in the monitoring and controlling process group. And lastly, we have the closing process group. Now, when all is said and done and the project's deliverable has actually been developed and checked for quality and approved by the customer, the next thing is taking it into the closing stage, a transition of that final product, service, or result. It could be a manufacturing plant, it could be a single widget, it could be a machine, it could be a service. But the key thing is the transition of that deliverable to the client. Something else that we do in closing is to gather lessons learned. Now you might say, well, this is actually an internal project, so I don't have a client external to my company. Maybe your client's internal. It's the same thing. Transition the deliverable, but also ensure that you are gathering lessons learned. You're learning what you did well and what you didn't do well, so that you can continuously improve, be it across the procurement or contract or the entire project. So let me show you a little mnemonic here, a mnemonic for you to remember the 5 process groups we just looked at. The mnemonic goes like this. I prefer extra money cash. I prefer extra money in cash. IPEMC. So initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So that's all for the process groups. Now you know project management can be broken down into 5 process groups. Typically, people think about these as groups that could overlap, and that's true. There's a lot of overlap in project management. So this is not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and then the project ends formula for project management. No, it's not. Amongst these process groups, there's a lot of overlap. I could overlap the red with the yellow, and the yellow with the blue, and the blue with the green, and the green with the yellow, and the orange with some parts of the green and blue and even yellow. It really depends on the project, right? So bear in mind that this is a high-level overview of process groups. Now let's talk about knowledge areas. I'm going to give you a high-level overview about knowledge areas. There are 10 areas of knowledge currently in the PMBOK guide. The first is called integration management. Integration management, to better understand it, think about integrating various pieces of a bicycle. You've got the wheels, you've got the handlebars, you've got the chain, you've got the brakes. That's all well and good, but if you don't integrate them, it's like nonsense, isn't it? And that's how project management is. We have different aspects of project management, but if you don't integrate them, it's nonsense, it's chaos. So, integration management is an area of knowledge. It's an art to be able to integrate the loose leaf aspects of a project. You've got the cost aspect, the scope aspect, the quality aspect. You've got so many aspects as you're going to see. So integration weaves everything that you're going to see together. Next is scope management. Scope management is all about carving out what the project should be focusing on and cutting out anything else. Schedule management, or time management as it's formally called, is all about carving out a schedule for the project that's realistic and that the team can march to. Cost management is all about defining that total budget, that budget target that the team aspires to meet on the project. It guides the team. It helps them understand their cost performance. Quality management is all about identifying fitness for use, conformance to requirements. What are the quality standards we need to be adhering to, and how do we make sure we do that? And then actually executing the plan. Human resource management, the next one, is all about acquiring the team, developing the team, and managing the team. Communications management is all about effectively communicating with your team members, with your stakeholders, with the customer, anyone on the project that has a stake in the project, planning and executing the plan for communicating. Risk management is all about identifying the best ways to manage uncertainty on the project and actually identifying those elements of uncertainty that could affect the project and making sure that any plans for risk are executed. Procurement management is all about identifying things that need to be bought external to the firm from subcontractors, sellers, vendors, whatever you call them, and then making sure that you work the contract. And lastly, stakeholder management. This is all about identifying stakeholders who the project could affect or who could affect the project, and then planning for how to keep them engaged on the project, and then going the next step to actually keep them engaged. And if you see that they're not being engaged, then you change your plan or you modify your plan. You do something to get them back on track, back engaged on your project. So those are the 10 areas of knowledge. Now here's a mnemonic for you. That's a picture that will be hard to forget. 2 chipmunks quietly having coffee and reading poetry stories. It's a knowledge area mnemonic that's out there. You might have heard it. I saw 2 chipmunks quietly having coffee, reading poetry stories. Great mnemonic for the knowledge areas. Now let's go through the knowledge areas one more time. Integration management is all about the overall coordination of project work. Scope management, identifying all to be done and managing just that. Time management, developing a schedule and managing it. Cost management, estimating task costs and budgeting the final total. Quality management, identifying quality targets and meeting them. Human resource management, forming, equipping and leading the team. Communications management, planning and managing project communications. Risk management, planning and managing uncertainties that impact the project. Procurement management, managing contracts and procurements. And stakeholder management, managing stakeholder engagement That is the entire landscape of the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guide. Understanding these knowledge areas, understanding the process groups I talked about, and within this presentation of knowledge areas and process groups, there are also 47 discrete processes, and each process could map to a knowledge area or a process group. So I've used the word processes quite a lot. Each process group is broken down further into processes, and each knowledge area is broken down further into processes. These overlap and give a total of 47 processes. So there's more detail to come. We've talked about 5 things, process groups, and 10 things, knowledge areas, but there are 47 other things called processes. But these are embedded into what I just described. A process for developing a charter for the project, a process for identifying stakeholders, a process for integrating various little plans into a big plan, a process for planning out scope management, how are we going to manage scope, how are we going to manage requirements, and then actually a process for collecting requirements, a process for defining scope and creating a WBS. Now we're going a little bit too deep. If you want to know more about all this stuff, we probably should get into a more advanced course. This is an overview, so let's not get lost. But to go back to the process group breakdown, at the top you've got initiating, that's a process group. On the left you've got integration and stakeholder management, knowledge areas. Now I've taken initiating because it's the smallest, or one of the smallest, process groups. You've only got 2 processes within initiating, but I'm showing you this so you can see how the processes map to a process group and a knowledge area. So take a look at this arrow pointing to initiating a process group. The arrows pointing to the knowledge areas. This process, Develop Project Charter, could belong to a process group and a knowledge area. It belongs to initiating and it belongs to integration management. Identify stakeholders also belongs to initiating, but it also belongs to stakeholder management as a knowledge area. So the stakeholder management knowledge area has one process called Identify Stakeholders within initiating, but it also has other processes in planning and executing and monitoring and controlling. This is a high-level overview to enable you see how the processes map to process groups and knowledge areas. To go even further, each of the 47 processes has a specific set of inputs, what you need to carry out the process, tools and techniques and tools that you could use to carry out the process, and outputs, what you get from the process. So I like to think about it like this. You've got a process in the middle, you've got inputs going into the process, things that you need to carry out the process. You've got tools and techniques that you use to work the process. And then you've got the output of the process. An example of how this works is the process could be developing a project charter, a document that authorizes the project. But you need certain inputs to do that. Some of the inputs that you could use to authorize the project are things like a business case or a statement of work from the customer, or certain templates that already exist in the firm. Those could be inputs. Now the technique that you could use to create the charter could be expert judgment, expertise, knowledge, awareness of that particular project, and some of the particular technical jargon or circumstances that surround the project could also be expert judgment. And we could also have a facilitation technique of sorts to harness that knowledge from the different experts involved in the early stages of the project. That's also a technique. And then the output, what we get out of the process, is the project charter. So each of the 47 processes has got inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. So when you really look at the broad spectrum of project management, you have an input to one process, tools and techniques of one process, an output of that process, and that output now becomes an input to somewhere else. Now we could have 5, 6, 7, 1, 2 outputs of each process, but typically there's a recycling of these outputs. So an output of one, for example, the project charter, becomes an input to identifying stakeholders, the input of the other. And then from identifying stakeholders, you get a stakeholder register, and that becomes an input to something else. And the chain goes on and on. So there's a lot of interrelation between the processes as documented in the PMBOK Guide 5th edition. Do these bad boys keep you up at night? Sign up for a self-study course at Praizion.com, especially if you're getting ready for your PMP exam or CAPM exam. But this is just a high-level presentation to demystify the PMBOK Guide. When you look at the PMBOK Guide for the first time, it might appear to be a little bit tough at first, but if you're used to reading unwieldy standards and you're used to reading books that go into a lot of depth, this may not even be a showstopper for you at all, as far as getting certified or as far as gaining knowledge from the perspective of the PMBOK Guide. Thank you very much for your audience, and I wish you all the best in your project management.